What's up, YouTube? Combat here, and it's my favorite time of the year. Not only is my birthday coming up this time next week, but it's NHL playoffs. For those who don't know, hockey is my favorite sport. It's what I'm most passionate about. I play it, I coach it, and I watch it, and I'm a hockey nut. I'm crazy about it, so I love it. So let's talk about this year's playoffs as the matchups are already set, ready to go, and everything starts off tomorrow. And I couldn't be more excited. My favorite team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, in the playoffs. So happy about that. But overall, the matchups in the first round seem to be pretty solid. And I'm going to actually talk about the Leafs and the Capitals last. And I'm going to put timestamps when I talk about each series down below in the description. So hopefully you guys can enjoy that. And if you want my take on your favorite team and on a certain series, you'll see that down below in the description. So let's start in the Western Conference, a little different, of course. And let's start with the Pacific Division, where we have the Anaheim Ducks facing off against the Calgary Flames. And I did not think that I would see the Anaheim Ducks winning the Pacific Division this year, as I don't think a lot of people did. Maybe some, obviously, but I thought the San Jose Sharks would walk away with this division, maybe have a little bit of trouble with LA, but LA didn't even make the playoffs. So because of that, Anaheim's in first place, which I was a little surprised about. So they get Calgary, and Calgary hasn't won in Anaheim in a very, very long time. Matt Sundin was still a Leaf. I believe Joe Nieuwendyk was still a Leaf. The Joe Louis Arena was still around. Hey, the Detroit Red Wings still made the playoffs. Sidney Crosby was... I don't even think he was in the NHL yet. I think it was 2004 last time they won. I could be wrong. Might maybe have been 2007. Regardless, Calgary has a huge monkey that they need to get off their back in this series, and that is being able to beat Anaheim in the Honda Center. And I think that if Calgary can do that, I think if Calgary can find a way to beat Anaheim in this on the road once, if they can win game one, if they come out, they win game one, they get that monkey off their back, not only beating Anaheim, but beating Anaheim at home right away, sets a tone for a series. And I honestly do believe that Calgary has the ability to beat Anaheim. Because I look at Anaheim on paper, they're very deep at defense, but I also look at their aging forward core and I think, that's beatable. And then I look at John Gibson, who last year was pulled for Frederik Andersen to go in, and I think, well, you know what? Maybe John Gibson isn't stable, or isn't a steady enough goalie, not steady enough of a goalie to go on a long playoff run. So maybe we will see Jonathan Bernier here, and as a Leaf fan, we all know how Jonathan Bernier did in the Leaf jersey. Doesn't have me too worried. And I do look at Brian Elliott, and I think, well, that's a solid goalie. So honestly and personally, I'm taking Calgary in this series. I think that Calgary can beat Anaheim. It's going to be my bold pick. I've got two bold picks, one in each conference. I have Calgary over Anaheim. That's my bold pick. So I'm going to say 6 games, Calgary, Anaheim. That's what I got. Now to move on to Edmonton versus San Jose. And I know Edmonton Oilers fans are so excited. They probably the most exciting player on the planet right now with Connor McDavid. However, how can you deny a team who was in the playoffs last year? Who were in the Stanley Cup Finals last year in San Jose. Granted, they kind of faltered a little bit from really being hot at the start of the year. You have Brent Burns, who's just an absolute beast, a monster. You still have Marleau, Thornton. It's hard to count San Jose out of this series, even though that you have Edmonton with arguably one of the best players in the league, maybe the best now, with Connor McDavid, who just won the Art Ross with 100 points when people are like, no more 100-point seasons in the NHL. But regardless of that, it's going to be interesting. This series could be really good, and it will be a really good test for Edmonton early. When you have to go up against a battle-tested team your first time, that's huge. Now, it's going to help that Todd McLellan has coached the San Jose Sharks. It's going to help that they have guys like Milan Lucic who've been in these situations. But what doesn't help is you've got guys, your biggest leaders, you've got McDavid, Draisaitl, Eberle, Nugent-Hopkins, Darnell Nurse. These guys have never played in these big games. Oscar Klefbom. And then their goalie, Cam Talbot, has never been there either. Sure, he's been on the bench with the New York Rangers, but at the same time, I don't look at this and think, powerhouse for playoffs. It takes time to be great in the playoffs. You don't just walk in and waltz in and dominate. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve because San Jose knows how to play in the playoffs. They know how to get away with that cheeky stuff and the couple of extra jabs after the whistle, and they're going to abuse that. But one of the things that I think that, and the way that Edmonton can win this series, is that they can penetrate that depth D that San Jose has, because I don't think San Jose's depth of defense is that great. I think if they can find a way to expose that and properly lineup match, this could be a more interesting series, but I do have San Jose beating Edmonton. And just so you guys know, I'm not going through every single series. So what I'll say is I'll say the teams that I'm going to pick for the quarterfinal, or for like the first round, and then I'm going to pick who I want to see in the conference finals and then in the finals. So that's what I'm going to do. So I won't talk about the second round. Okay. So then going to the Central Division, you have Nashville, you have Chicago. Chicago being the best team in the Western Conference versus Nashville, a team I thought was going to be the best team in the Western Conference. And a lot of people picked this team to be a Stanley Cup favorite at the beginning of the year, including myself. I believe in the Nashville Predators, but it's so tough to count Chicago out, especially with how good some of those players are that are on Chicago. Especially, you can take Taves and Kane out of the equation. You still got Panarin, Keith, Seabrook. But it's going to be an interesting playoff series, because I think it's a series that if Pekka Rinne shows up and plays his best hockey, that could be scary. And I do believe that Pekka Rinne is a world-class goalie when he plays that level. Like, his highest level is world-class, elite, better than anybody else. And he also has this like weird mediocre stage where he just kind of looks like an average goalie in the NHL. So it'd be nice to see that elite level come from Pekka Rinne in this series. And I personally think that if Pekka Rinne is playing at that elite level and Chicago runs into that, I don't think Corey Crawford's good enough to support that team so that they don't have some casualties and lose this series. But that's a big if. That's a big variable to say, well, Pekka Rinne needs to play the best 6 games of his career to give Nashville a chance. I think it's going to be a fantastic series. I think it's going to be entertaining. I think we're going to see a bunch of overtime games. But I have a tough time going with Nashville, so I have to pick Chicago. Even though I think if Pekka Rinne plays his best hockey, they'll win the series, because I think he'll outbattle Corey Crawford in that situation. It's still tough to say, though. And I'm going to take Chicago just because it's Chicago. It's hard to bet against them, right? Then you've got the St. Louis Blues and the Minnesota Wild. 2 very defensive-minded teams, play a very defensive-minded system. Both have recently hired new coaches, obviously, in the interim for the St. Louis Blues this season. And, well, they had Mike Yeo at the start, but Mike Yeo, and then you have, is it Bruce Boudreau? Yeah, Boudreau coaches the Wild. So you have 2 teams that went through a coaching change as recently. These aren't the same teams as they were last year in the playoffs. And the truth of the matter is I look at Minnesota Wild and I say they're going to go as far as Dubnyk can take them, because I think they've got the depth everywhere. They're deep at forward, they're deep at D, and they've got the ability to score. Eric Stahl is like a reborn human being, and I love it. I love seeing a guy be able to come out and play that way, reignite his career the way he has. I really hope that Rick Nash can do that in the future, but I'm going to talk about that with the Rangers. Really nice to see. But overall, this is going to come right down to goaltending and how well Jake Allen responds with the pressure that's going to come with this series. I talked about Brian Elliott, how he was battle-worn with the Calgary Flames because he's been in so many series for the St. Louis Blues, but it's going to come down to goaltending. I know they've got the finishing ability because Vladimir Tarasenko is really good, but I have to go Minnesota here. Consistency for me in net with Devin Dubnyk, who's been there before. This team is ready. This Minnesota Wild team is ready to take that next step. So I'm going to take Minnesota over St. Louis. I think it's going to be a long series, 6 or 7 games. This isn't going to be one team taking an advantage and sweeping or taking it in 5. 6 or 7 game series, and I'm going to take Minnesota. Then, I guess for the conference final, I'm going to say Minnesota and San Jose personally. I think Minnesota versus San Jose would be a really fun series. And ultimately, I could see Minnesota winning that. I think Minnesota's just depth-wise, I think they're better, and I think that it would come down to Jones versus Dubnyk, which would be great. I think it'd be a long conference final. So going Sharks, Wild in the Western Conference, and Wild moving on to the Stanley Cup final from the West. Now moving to the East, let's start in the Atlantic Division with the Montreal Canadiens taking on the New York Rangers. And this series for me is an easy one to pick because I look at the Montreal Canadiens on paper and I don't see a scary playoff team. I see a team that has had variable amounts of success this season, who's fired a coach, brought a new coach in, and I think to myself, they're beatable. It has to take Montreal and Carey Price. It has to take Carey Price to play out of this world for 5 games for 4 games for them to win this series. I think on paper, the New York Rangers are just a better team. I think they're, I wouldn't say better coached, but I like the systems that the New York Rangers play more than I like what Montreal is playing. You need Radulov and Galchenyuk to step up. You know Pacioretty's going to show up, but Galchenyuk and Radulov have to be there. Andrew Shaw has to be a pest. Shea Weber has to be able to shut down guys. I think he has to be able to score as well. I don't look at Montreal and think unbeatable. I look at the Rangers and say they're hungry, and if Lundqvist continues to play the way he has since that really weird cold stretch he had earlier in the season, and he continues to play on this hot streak at a high level, play like he can, I think the Rangers take this series. So I'm picking the Rangers. I think it's going to be a 5 or 6 game series. Personally, I look at the Rangers, I say, I think playoff team. I look at the Canadians, and I don't really know what they want to be. Like, the Rangers have an identity in the sense that they're just a defensive powerhouse team, and there's going to be a lot of 3-2 games in that series because it's going to come down to goaltending, and I just think the defensive systems that are around Henrik Lundqvist are better than the defensive systems around Carey Price. Just my personal opinion. So I'm going to pick the Rangers in that series. Then you got Boston-Ottawa, which is an enigma. Like, I was talking to my dad about this earlier today, and I'm like, I really don't know who to pick in this series. Because Erik Karlsson's been in and out of the lineup recently, and as much as you can say, oh, he's 100%, or it's playoffs, you fight through injuries, like, if he's somewhat injured, that's gotta be some sort of, it's gotta hurt the Ottawa Senators overall. And really, this series, for me, isn't going to come down to necessarily goaltending. It's going to be who's going to step up. And for Boston, it's probably going to be the same 3 guys who stepped up all season, with Pasternak and Marchand and Bergeron just being kind of the guys they need to be. But at the same time, you look at the other end of the ice, you got Michael Hoffman, Mark Stone. There's some great talent in this series, some great young talent as well. So it's going to be a decent series. They've never played each other before, but this one's the toughest one for me to pick because I hate both teams being a Leaf fan. And I look at this series and I think what could have been with Toronto versus Ottawa, because it would have been a great matchup. And I think that something like that Derek Brassard for Mika Zibanejad trade that was made in the summertime for Ottawa is going to pay dividends in the playoffs. But I'm really wondering if this team is ready to take that next step to beat somebody like the Bruins, who I've seen just be mean and dirty in the playoffs consistently because they know what to get away with because they've been there. So it's interesting. It'll be neat to see how Guy Boucher handles that. It'll be his second time playing the Bruins as a coach of a team. So it'll be interesting to see if he changes his systems up. Cassidy being a young coach, or not a young coach, but a new coach in the playoffs, that could play a factor as well. So I've really been on both sides of it, but I think I'm going to go Ottawa in this series. I really do. I think that Craig Anderson is playing with something this year that is fantastic. It's a tragedy what's going on with his wife, but at the same time, it's amazing to see the level of play that he's taken. And let's say he needs to step away. Michael Condon's been a very good replacement. Nothing to discount Tuukka Rask, but I don't know. I'm going to go Ottawa here. I'm just going to go Ottawa. So I'm going to pick Ottawa probably in 7 games, to be honest. Then we go to the East, and I'm going to do the 2-3 matchup between Pittsburgh and Columbus first. And this is going to be a really good matchup. I really think that it's going to be a fun matchup because the Blue Jackets have a player named Brandon Dubinsky who can piss off Sidney Crosby better than anybody else in the league, and he'll just be a pest the entire time he's on the ice to him. And that's his job. That's going to be Dubinsky's job all playoffs. Watch Crosby, be a pest, and be a jerk. And I think he can do it well enough. The question is, especially with the way that the Columbus Blue Jackets are coming into the playoffs, barely getting by Toronto, and then losing 6 straight before that. You know, they came back from a 2-0 deficit, a 1-3-2, but they won, I think it was 6 straight, or lost 6 straight before the game against Toronto, which closed out the season for them. So that makes me wonder what the plan moving forward is here, whether or not Columbus is going to crumble under the pressure of the playoffs or not, or if they just knew they didn't have much to play for, so they just stopped playing. It's going to be interesting to see how Columbus responds to a team that won the Stanley Cup last year, and to a team that doesn't have their top defenseman. Like, not having Christopher Letang for the Pittsburgh Penguins is a scary thing, and I'm excited and kind of nervous to see what's going to happen with that from the side of the Pittsburgh Penguins, because that's a huge hole to fill. No one else is missing their top defenseman. Like, it'd be like if Erik Karlsson was out for the Ottawa Senators. Obviously, he's going to play, but Chris Letang, that's just such a huge hole to fill. Luckily, you still got Kessel, Malkin, Bonino, Crosby, of course. There's still a boatload of superstars on this team, and you've got 2 goalies that can play. So if one goes cold, you can just throw the other one in anyways. So it's tough to say who's going to win this series. I think it's going to really come down to how well Columbus can shut down Crosby and shut down Malkin. You can shut down one, but the other one's probably going to score. So they have to be able to do both, and that's very easier said than done. And to be honest, I think Pittsburgh's going to win the series because I want to see a Pittsburgh-Washington series. So I'm going to pick Pittsburgh. I think they're going to do it in 6 games. I think it'll be an awesome series. I think it'll build a rivalry between these 2 teams because no one really has a rivalry with the Columbus Blue Jackets, but this could start one. And now we're going to move to Washington versus Toronto. And I am a proud Leaf fan, and I was with them through all these crappy years. It was such an excitement last year when they won the draft lottery. Such an excitement this year watching these rookies play. So awesome watching them make the playoffs, even though they stunk down the stretch at times, like this past week. And you saw the level of difference between what Washington has and what Toronto has. I don't want to count Toronto out, but as I've said before, there's something about the playoffs that you need to have the experience of being there to be able to really respond and play at that really high level, because you need to know how to play in the playoffs. You need to know what you can get away with, and that's one of the biggest things the Bruins did to the Leafs in 2013. They bullied them towards the end of that game. They were able to just really get on the nerves and get under the skin of the Leafs, and I think that could be something that'll happen this series. Ovechkin wants this cup. He wants it. And I really think that Washington's going to be the team that wins it this year. They're my early pick. So obviously I'm going Washington in this series. But I think it's the step in the right direction for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm excited for the future for them. I think getting this taste of the playoffs, understanding what it takes to get there, understanding what it takes to win in the playoffs is huge. They need a win. They need to win 1 game. If they can make it a 5-game series, win once, and win at home too, I think it'll pay dividends in the future. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, this team's really going to compete, but I don't think it's this year. This year is for the Capitals. So with that being said, obviously I have the Capitals coming into the Eastern Conference Final, and they're going to be playing against the New York Rangers, because if the Rangers get by the Habs, I think they'll easily pass by the Senators, or even the Bruins for that matter. So then I've got Washington, New York. I think that'd be a really good series. And the last time Washington played New York, I think it was Derek Stepan scored in overtime to put New York into the Eastern Conference Finals. This time the reverse is going to happen, and I could see Ovechkin get an overtime goal in Game 7 to send the Caps to the Stanley Cup Final against the Minnesota Wild. And I think that a Minnesota Wild Washington Capitals series would be really fun to watch, because you'd have 2 teams that play a hard-nosed style. And then who is behind the bench of the Minnesota Wild? Bruce Boudreau, who used to coach the Washington Capitals. Bruce Boudreau. It'd be an awesome narrative to have, and it'd be just an awesome series overall. You could highlight the goaltending of Braden Holtby versus Devin Dubnyk. You would have awesome defensive matchups like Ryan Suter, Matt Dumba, John Carlson and Kevin Shattenkirk. There's a lot of storylines here, and I think it'd be really cool to see, and I think that this is Washington's year. I'm picking them as my Stanley Cup champion this year. I've picked them in the past and been wrong, but there's something different about this year. Having Kevin Shattenkirk is going to be huge. I am excited for the playoffs. I'm excited for this year, and I really hope that I get to see Alexander Ovechkin lift Lord Stanley over his head with Braden Holtby going home with the Conn Smythe. Right, it's Conn Smythe. Conn Smythe? Yeah, Conn Smythe for top playoff player. So I want to know what your guys' predictions are down below for the Stanley Cup Final. just overall for the Stanley Cup playoffs. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a little different, and I know it's a little long, but I wanted to give somewhat of my analysis as to why I'm making those picks. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys disagree with me, because I'd love to hear some of your reasoning as to why you're going with a certain team over another team. So thank you guys very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, can you please hit that like button? If you want to see more videos from me, please hit that subscribe button. And until next time, guys, Combat signing off. Peace.